Hello, my name is Kennedy Kerrigan, and my comparative study is on military intervention and its effects on women's rights. Women's rights have never been the focus of our male dominated world. America is the nation of democracy and equality, and it is expected by many to be an advocate for the rights of all minorities. This is not the case. Many countries that have military intervention from the United States and other major world powers can examine past data to determine how the intervention has affected the rights of women. My comparative study will determine how military intervention and conflict plays a role in promoting women's rights. The research question being addressed is, do military interventions in general have a statistically significant impact on women's rights? This is important because humans should not inherently be more or less liberated because of their gender. The study can become more complex when one also observes the choice to become or not become a democracy after intervention. So for my literature review, there have been numerous countries that have faced military intervention in international conflicts, internally and externally. So there has been a significant research done in this field. Researchers have found no dramatic effect, either positive or negative, on the intervention of the status of women. So my goal was to basically see if this was true and determine the why. For my design, I used the analysis of statistical data to first obtain my data on the World Bank World Development Indicators 2006. The primary design began by reading literature on the topics of military intervention, women's rights, human rights, indicators of women's rights such as fertility rate, literacy rate in comparison to men, and number of women in the labor force. This was achieved by searching the University of Mississippi's library database and the World Bank datasets. I measured the variables that corresponded to the concept of the interest of my study. That included 6 countries, a 20-year period of dates, conflict years, and each of the 3 indicators of women's rights. Next was the evaluation of adjustment of the data because of computer error and human error in terms of data entry. The limitations of the data included being unable to stereotype all countries in conflict by evaluating 6 countries. 3 of the cases, El Salvador, Mozambique, and Namibia, showed evidence of democratic change, but Cambodia, Haiti, and Somalia remain undemocratized after military intervention. In the study was comparing the measures of equality prior to and post-intervention to analyze the effect of intervention in order to discover whether the women's status improved, decreased, or remained unchanged. Although past studies have confirmed there is no statistically significant change, I asked why the results are this way. And lastly, I analyzed the data through a paired samples t-test to determine whether there is statistical evidence that the mean difference between the paired observations on a particular outcome was significantly different from 0. For the sample, there were 6 countries sampled. These countries were selected because 3 of them showed democratic tendencies after military intervention, while the others did not. And the variables were selected because previous historical studies defined the terms of women's rights and equality. Again, the limitations of the data was that it is not large enough to be completely and totally accurate, so there might be some outliers. And the missing data mentioned in my design portion does not necessarily change the results of the study. However, it would be telling of whether or not the change would have happened without military intervention. Measurement is important to have operational definitions for the sake of replicability. Data was compiled from the World Bank Development Indicators database from 2006. The date variable is manipulated by using conflict years to determine pre and post levels of change for the equality variable. The study used 1 for yes being a conflict year and 2 for not being a conflict year. And this is then compared using a paired samples t-test. World Bank is reliable. And although there were only 3 measures of indicators of women's equality, there are many variables that could have been an indicator to gain a more comprehensive view of the change or lack thereof. The procedures include an in-depth review of the historical data. A data set was created from World Bank data. Data was input into SPSS, and analysis was run for a paired sample t-test. And the correlation was analyzed and the findings were documented. Findings result, it is important to consider how strongly the two variables, conflict here and equality variables, are associated with one another because they are being compared pre-conflict and post-conflict. As you can see from this analysis, the correlation is 0.0101, which is extremely low and basically insignificant. We say the same thing on the pair differences, where on the significant two-tailed, it's 0.000, showing no correlation. Same thing on the women in the labor force. That's going to be a correlation of 0.076 and a 0% two-tailed significance. And lastly, same thing, correlation 0.133 on female versus male literacy and 0% on the significance two-tailed. So democracy does not increase women's rights. Intervention holds little to no influence on the rights of women. The democratic states instituting intervention are not rightfully instituting democracy because there has not been a significant change in women's rights and equality in general. In the future, I would examine countries that did not face intervention to compare the normal effects to intervention effects, meaning I wonder if they would have decreased or had a significant decrease without intervention to kind of monopolize just the military intervention itself. Thank you.